Hey there, and welcome to my first ever Studio Ghibli video. And today, I want to take a walk down memory lane and talk about one of my favourite films of all time, Porco Rosso. Now, this isn't going to be a video talking about how Porco Rosso is some underrated masterpiece that deserves more attention and acclaim. I think people are probably a little bit tired of me jumping up on my soapbox on the regular and telling people how every movie under the sun is somehow an underrated masterpiece and that they deserve more contemporary attention. Because I'll be real, I do think this thing did pretty well for itself at the time of its release, and it's already been widely acknowledged that this is one of the studio's most underrated and underappreciated works. A work that has gotten a little bit lost to time. And so, I'm not really going to delve too much more deeply into that. It did well at the box office, at least compared to other films from the studio, so it's not like it was a bomb. Hell, it was #1 at the Japanese box office at the time of its release. And in terms of its critical reception, whilst it doesn't have that many reviews online, those that it does have are almost all highly positive, landing at a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, so it's clear it did well for itself, and it got the rewards it deserved at the time. The fact that it's been overshadowed in the decades since doesn't negate how good a film it is and all the things that it does right. And so really, that's what I want this video to be about. That's what I want to talk about today. The simplistic perfection that is Porco Rosso. Why I love it, and that's it. No guilting people if they don't like it. Not trying to convince you that suddenly it needs to be on top of your all-time favourite films list, or that you need to become a die-hard fan like me, but if I can convince you to give it a rewatch or watch it for the first time if you haven't seen it, I think I've achieved what I set out to do. And I really do have a lot of emotion attached to this thing. I remember seeing it for the first time when I was a little kid on a channel called SBS, which in Australia often plays foreign language films, and I was immediately sucked in. To a little kid, what is cooler than a pig man who flies a plane and shoots up bad guys? It's really one of those core cinematic memories that sort of stuck through me throughout my life. Sitting with my brother, watching this random flying pig. But anyway, before I go any further down that road of nostalgia and make myself feel sad that I'm getting older, I'd better just get into the body of the video. So for those of you that might not be aware, Porco Rosso, released in 1992, tells the story of Marco Rossellini, aka Porco Rosso. A World War I sky ace turned seaplane pilot and bounty hunter who's been cursed to have the appearance of a pig. And when we first meet Porco, he's arriving just in time to fend off a crew of sky pirates who are attempting to attack and loot a passing ocean liner. And after fending off the pirates and sending them off with their tails between their legs, Porco has dinner at the Hotel Adriano, run by his friend and love interest, Gina, the widow of one of his old comrades. During this dinner, he earns the ire of Curtis, an American fighter ace with an interest in Gina, who takes up a contract from the pirates to kill Porco, eventually ambushing him as he flies to Milan for plane repairs, claiming credit for the supposed kill. Having survived the encounter, however, Porco makes his way via train to Italy, where there's a warrant for his arrest by the fascist regime. And here he meets his engineer Piccolo, who reveals his sons, who usually help him with his work, have all left Milan due to the Great Depression, and thus, Porco has to rely on his granddaughter and the other women in his family to handle the repairs. And of course, Porco, after realizing just how dedicated they are to the job, agrees. Upon his return to the Adriatic, Porco finds himself challenged to a duel by Curtis, who's still salty that Gina won't marry him as she's in love with Porco. And so the two make a bet. If Porco wins, Curtis has to pay off all his debts. And if Curtis wins, he gets to marry Fio, who's Porco's engineer and Piccolo's granddaughter that we mentioned earlier. And after a bit of a dogfight, the two find themselves bare-knuckle boxing after the machine gun jams on both their planes, and after a grueling contest, Porco, being the hero, manages to come away with the victory, before leading the Italian Air Force away alongside Curtis, as the fascists had gotten word of the proceedings and were on their way to arrest everybody, before he flies off into the unknown, with his ultimate fate being left up to the audience interpretation. And yeah, I love this movie with an undying passion. There's just so much to enjoy. And so, I guess I better just start gushing. And we'll start off with something that's pretty basic. The visuals. Now obviously the actual visual quality, well, I wouldn't say it's lacking because it isn't, but you can tell it's 30 years old. It's hand-drawn animation from the early 90s. And you can tell, just like when you watch those old early Renaissance Disney films, you can tell they too look a little bit dated. Well, unless you watch one of the remastered versions. They do love to re-release them. So it's not like this thing's going to knock your socks off as a visual masterpiece, or at least in terms of the quality, but regardless I still think it looks good, and I'm sure it looked very good for the time. But that's not what I'm referring to. It's more the style, the design, the world which is created by the film. It just has this way of calming you, relaxing you. When Porco's flying his plane high above the Adriatic, or quietly resting in his cove, or eating dinner at Gina's hotel, it instills this beautiful feeling of serenity.
How's the serenity?
And I know that sounds pretentious as all hell, and I'd be rolling my eyes if somebody said this to me, but it's true. The visuals just complement the story so well. So it helps you get inside the character's head, makes you understand why this is the life he's chosen, why he retreats to this world when he begins to struggle. It's quite simplistic in its design. It is set in a fictionalized version of the real world, and so, whilst it is fantastical in nature, in that he's a pig flying a plane, it's set against a background of simplicity, from the clothes the characters wear, to the architecture, and even to the planes themselves. And then these simplistic designs further contrast against that serene beauty that's created by the wide open sky, and the expansive Adriatic Sea below, to make an effect that at times just feels ethereal in nature. But yeah, enough pretentious gushing about how the film looks beautiful and makes me feel things. Let's get into the plot and the characters. So we'll start off with the story. And it is very simplistic, or at least it's very simplistic on the surface. Because if you boil it down to its basic components, it's a very simple tale of a man who loses a fight and in an effort to restore his reputation, has to go away and prepare for a second clash in which he hopes to find his redemption. And that's fine. It has that surface level storyline for those that are just looking for a good time. No shame in that. But for those that choose to look a little deeper as well, it actually is a very moving tale about depression, PTSD, and survivor guilt, and it handles it in a very realistic way for both the time period they use and in the effect that it has on his life. Prior to the First World War, Porco, or Marco in this case, was a seaplane enthusiast who was close friends with Gina. However, as described during the film, shortly after Gina's marriage to his best friend, his squadron were called into battle in one of the worst dogfights he'd ever experienced, with all his comrades being killed in the ensuing fight, except for him. Marco then had a vision of all of them ascending into heaven, flying above the clouds with all the other aviators who found their end in the sky, whilst he's forced to return to reality alone. And just a quick side note, that whole scene, it's just a premium example of what I said earlier, of a scene that's just so simple in terms of its visual design, but manages to evoke this feeling of awe and serenity in the audience.
I think he also just loved the word.
So much serenity.
I'm just so mesmerized by this scene, both the visual elements and the sound design as well, honestly. It's so otherworldly and beautiful, ethereal, amazing stuff. But anyway, I'm gushing again. Back to the character and story analysis. And thus begins his struggle with mental illness, and indeed, his outer appearance as a pig reflects these inner beliefs. That he was a coward who abandoned his friends, that he truly was a pig, and that it should have been him who died. And in true 1920s fashion, he refuses to seek help, and he just tries to soldier on through it, living his life at a distance to everybody, never really being able to engage with the world around him, even with close friends like Theo and Gina, insisting that he's a pig and that's all he'll ever be, making his self-hatred a part of his external character instead of just a personality trait. And honestly, in that way, he feels like a very relatable and very real character, despite him being a humanoid pig. He deals with his issues through internalizing them or avoiding them, and he doesn't work his way through them in a healthy way. He struggles and he needs other characters' help to see himself the way they see him. And despite that love he receives from both Theo and Gina, the ending's left open. Does he work through his mental health issues and accept Gina's love? Does he go to the garden and fall in love with her? Who knows? It's up to you. And that's exciting. And that's another element of the story I enjoy. The romance. It feels very real in that it's only a small facet of his story and it doesn't just overwhelm his life. They dance around their feelings. They don't verbalize them properly, at least not to each other. But despite that, in their interactions, you can tell there's a deep affection there. And by the end of the film, you don't know if they fall in love and spend their lives together. You don't get that sense of closure. And so I feel like the film remains in your mind for a long time afterwards as you try to piece together how you think the story went, what you think happens next. And considering how much content there is in this day and age, and how audiences are expected to leap from one franchise or story to the next at breakneck speed, I think a film that understands how to keep you thinking about it for days after you watch it should really be commended for that achievement. So yeah, that's really what this film excels in. Taking these old tropey type things, like the romance, and turning them on their head. The hero doesn't necessarily get the girl in the end. And he doesn't just completely defeat the nasty fascists. The American ace pilot is neither the hero nor the villain. He sits somewhere in between. The hero, Porco, doesn't get over his issues. He doesn't break the curse and become human again, at least not on screen. There's the implication, but we never get to see it. And I think that these divergences from what the audience expects really helps to set the film apart from many others of its type. The story doesn't conform to these common tropes, and it benefits from it greatly. And really, beyond all of that, there isn't much else to say. The film's great, it makes me happy, and I hope it makes you happy too. A deeply rich world and story that's both fantastical and yet grounded in real-world events and history, mingled with a story that feels both groundbreaking and yet cynical and realistic, whilst also looking and sounding beautiful. What more could you want? Hell yeah! But anyway, these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the film if you've seen it? Agree with me, disagree, maybe some reasons why, and if you haven't seen it, have I convinced you to give it a watch? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.